afternoon. Welcome. I'm Susan Kelly, President of the City Club. Welcome to another special program, our economic forecast for 2003. We have with us today two experts on the subject, John Mitchell, Western Regional Economist, U.S. Bank, and Tom Potiowsky, Oregon State Economist. As you all know, as you are all painfully aware, one of the critical elements in Oregon's economic future is the vote on ballot measure 28 this month. We have asked both of our speakers to address the effect of the passage or failure of this measure on Oregon's future. Before we begin today, our program today will present City Club's ballot measure report on measure 28. All City Club reports are written by our volunteer members who are carefully screened for conflict of interest before they are appointed to serve on a research committee. City Club committees thoroughly research available information and interview experts on both sides of the issue. You, who represent the entire City Club membership, now have the opportunity to discuss, debate, and vote to accept or reject the study committee recommendation. Voting cards were distributed at the door to City Club members. If you do not have a card, please raise your hand and a staff person will assist you. Copies of the ballot measure 28 report are available on your tables or at the information table in the back, and all members did receive them with your recent bulletin. The publication of this report and its recommendation follow review by the City Club Research Board and then the Board of Governors. The ballot measure 28 report, which would temporarily increase income tax rates, is ready for your consideration. Brian Campbell, chair of the Measure 28 Committee, will present the report and its recommendation. Following Brian's presentation, he will move for approval of the ballot measure 28 report, and we will proceed to debate the measure. Please be reminded that it is City Club policy that members only will be allowed to participate in the discussion, the debate, and the vote. Before I introduce Brian, I want to review the club's bylaws on report votes, and you'll find copies of this also on your table. Number 1, to accept or reject individual report recommendations. 2, postpone consideration or further consideration to a subsequent meeting, a debatable motion requiring a 2/3 majority for adoption. 3, postpone consideration on the report indefinitely, which also requires a 2/3 majority. A motion to table and any other motion that would delay consideration of the main motion beyond this meeting is not in order. Chris Smith, member of the Board of Governors, will serve as our parliamentarian, and board host Wayne Lay will serve as timekeeper for today's debate. Now I'll turn the podium over to Brian, and he will present the ballot measure 28 report. Brian?
Thank you, Susan. I want to first introduce the members of the study committee, so if they will stand when I talk or introduce them. Marilyn Albers, Pete Jacobs, Leslie Moorhead, and Roger Smith are here. Mark Magnuson and Laura Alec are absent, and Tim Hemstreet, who's our research advisor, is here, as well as, of course, Wade Fickler was of great help, as usual. And before I talk about a recommendation, I need to first mention that there is a misstatement on page 8 of the report in the last sentence of the first paragraph, and there are green cards for anybody who really wants to look at this in detail on your table. There are a couple of those around. Footnote 5 accurately explains why less money will be collected from Measure 28 in the second and third years, but we misinterpreted that explanation in this sentence. So actually, the average annual amount collected from each of us would be approximately as indicated in the table in each of the 3 years of the measures in effect, assuming each of us had the same income of each year. So for those of you who have been able to read our report, you can see that there are a number of questions that we've attempted to address, but our recommendation on Measure 28 really boils down to how we answered two fairly simple questions. First, do you believe that many of Oregon's most vulnerable residents will be harmed if Measure 28 fails to pass? And second, do you believe that passing it would have an acceptable level of impact on the pocketbooks of low and moderate income Oregonians? The committee believes the answer to both questions is yes. On the first question, after listening to witnesses with a wide range of opinions on this measure and government spending in general, we came to the conclusion that without the additional revenue from this measure, There would be very serious program cuts, particularly to programs vital to the lives of children, people with mental health problems, and those most in need of protection from the criminal justice system, among many others. Whether or not the exact cuts on state programs and school districts required by House Bill 5100, if Measure 28 fails, are carried out, this committee believes there will have to be very real cuts made in some mixture of programs. For instance, if K through 12 education is held harmless instead of absorbing an additional $95 million in cuts, then that amount will have to come out of the state programs that have already been severely impacted. One of the questions we asked ourselves in looking at what would happen if the measure failed was why the program cuts appear to be so severe when the $310 million amount is such a small percentage of the total state budget. Essentially, the answer is that all of the cuts would come in the last 5 months of the 2001-2003 biennium, which translates to about a 12% average reduction for all targeted programs, and that's a serious impact on anyone's budget. Finally, we heard testimony that there are a number of efficiencies or cost reductions that could be made in many government programs. While that may or may not be true, it will take a lot of time and effort to identify and agree on the elimination of whole programs or more targeted program cuts than those mandated by House Bill 5100. In our opinion, this could not be done before the required spending reductions must occur on February 1st. On the tax impact question, if the measure passes, we determined that the actual impact on low and moderate income people would be fairly modest. While we certainly are sensitive to the fact that any increase in expenditures could be burdensome for many Oregonians, the way Measure 28 would distribute the tax burden, higher income groups, in other words, those clearly able to pay the extra amount, would pay a much higher percentage of their income on this increase than would low and moderate income groups. In fact, the Legislative Revenue Office estimates that almost a quarter of all Oregonians, in other words, the lowest income Oregonians, would pay no additional taxes, while even those in the middle income range would pay less than their proportional share. It's clear to us that compared to the potential negative impact on low and moderate income families if essential services are scaled back, the small tax increases they would pay if Measure 28 passes is worth it. And we think that by passing it, Oregonians would be sending a strong message to the legislature that they are willing to step up and pay for education and human services. As a result, we recommend a yes vote on Measure 28, and I move approval.
The microphone to my right is for, and the one to my left is against. If you approach the for microphone, you're in favor of the report and its recommendation to vote yes on the measure. If you approach the against, you are opposed to the committee's report and recommendation and prefer that the City Club take no position on 28. I'll alternate between the two. If we have comments, please step forward. Limit your comments to 2 minutes so that we will have enough time for everyone to speak. Thank you, Steve.
Steve Novick, City Club member. Since yesterday was Richard Nixon's birthday, and John Mitchell is one of our speakers, I think it would be appropriate to quote, or rather paraphrase, our 37th president. Yes, you could vote against Measure 28, but it would be wrong. And the arguments that are raised against Measure 28 are wrong too. There are those who will say, well, if I give this money to the government, I don't know where it's going to go. And people are entitled to know where it's going to go, but we can tell them. Because state government really only does 3 things in Oregon: education, law enforcement, public safety, and healthcare. All the little agencies can be put under those umbrellas. You know, there's child welfare protection, child protection, that's kind of healthcare, it's kind of law enforcement. There's senior and disabled services, that's kind of healthcare. And of course, the Oregon Health Plan is healthcare, and aid to the schools is education, and prisons are law enforcement. So you can be assured where the money's going to go. It's going to go to education, healthcare, and law enforcement. And if the measure does not pass, those are where the cuts are going to come. There will be those who say that, well, they got to fix that PERS problem first. And the governor is going to fix the PERS problem. But even if there were no PERS problem, that's just a fraction of this budget problem. there were no PERS problem, these cuts that will happen if Measure 28 fails would still be looming. You could say, well, government's been growing too darn much lately, but that also would be wrong, because if you look at the state budget, the only things that have grown are expenses on healthcare, which is true in the private economy as well, expenses on prisons, which is what we decided to do, and state expenses in education, which has replaced local revenue in education. So again, I say, quoting Richard Nixon, you could vote against Measure 28, but it would be wrong.
No against speakers. We have another for speaker.
My name is Pete Jacobs. I was on the Measure 28 Study Committee. Measure 28 is a short-term, 3-year tax which will have no negative impact on the long-term health of the state's economy. It's a fair tax. 25% of the poorest Oregonians will not have to pay any additional taxes, while the additional tax burden of the wealthy will increase. Oregonians pay significantly less taxes than citizens in other states, ranking 45th of all states in terms of total tax burden. This makes an increase in income tax a reasonable fix to the state budget crisis. Finally, a precedent was set in the 80s when a short-term tax increase was implemented in response to a similar budget crisis. And let's face it, we have to balance the budget, which means that we can either make the cuts or raise taxes. Making cuts to existing programs is significantly more expensive in the long term, since it costs more to restore old programs than it costs to continue existing ones. If we do choose to make the cuts, which are scheduled if Measure 28 fails, the state stands to lose an additional $70 million in federal matching funds, magnifying the impact of the cuts. And there's the immediate impact to our schools, social services, and the criminal justice system. Here in Portland, the schools are already slated to cut 15 days from this school year. If Measure 28 fails, 9 additional days will be cut. The Oregon State Police would lay off 322 of 1,400 employees while shutting 4 of its 7 crime labs. Cuts will be realized in reductions in services to mental health patients through elimination of employment programs, inpatient care, child mental health services, and the closing of a number of mental health wards in hospitals around the state. I urge you to be responsible and vote yes on Measure 28.
Could we have a call for the question? We will now have the vote. All in favor of approving the Measure 28 report, please raise your voting card. All those opposed? The City Club membership has voted. The City Club membership has voted outstandingly to approve the Measure 28 report. This now becomes the position of the club on this issue. Thank you to Brian and your committee for your exceptional work on this report. Our board host today is Wayne Lay, member of the Board of Governors and Director of Environmental Policy for Portland General Electric, and he'll ask the first question of our speakers. Following Wayne's question, we will open the program to questions from City Club members only. Please line up behind the microphone, the for microphone, as soon as Wayne starts to ask his question, so there's no lag time and we are able to have as many questions as possible. Identify yourself as a City Club member and limit your question to 30 seconds. I remind you that we want questions of our speakers rather than statements or opinions from the floor. Thank you. Broadcast of City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Pope & Talbot, Weyerhaeuser, and Pacific Corp. We're very grateful for their support. Our speakers today are highly qualified to address this topic. In 1999, Tom Potiowsky was appointed the state economist for Oregon. He is responsible for developing quarterly state economic and demographic forecasts and estimating general fund revenue for the state. These forecasts are used to develop both the governor's budget and the legislatively approved budget. Tom is on leave from PSU, Portland State University, as chair of the economics department, where he has taught since 1983. He received his BBA degree in economics from Ohio University and his PhD from the University of Colorado. He has been active nationally and internationally in areas of macroeconomics and forecasting. John Mitchell has been with U.S. Bancorp since 1983 and currently as the chief economist for the Western region. He is responsible for analyzing and forecasting the economy. He was a professor of economics at Boise State University for 13 years prior to joining the U.S. Bank Corps here in Portland. John received his BA from Williams College and his MS and PhD degrees from the University of Oregon. He is a fellow of the College of Arts and Sciences at the U of O and a member of Phi Beta Kappa. Both our speakers are members of economic and business associations and have served on the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. Please welcome our two speakers, beginning with Tom. John?
I'm not Tom. It's very nice to be here. To be here today. As you might imagine, this is an extraordinarily exciting time to be an economist, an observer of the national environment. Now, from a technical standpoint, the recession probably ended over a year ago. We've had 5 consecutive quarters. We don't have formal confirmation of the 5th, but we've probably had 5 consecutive quarters of growth. I don't know of another recession that has had 5 quarters of growth within it. From an inflation perspective, we have the situation where the central bank actually has to consider or have a discussion about the prospects of deflation. As many of you in the room can remember, it was not too long ago that we were talking about double-digit inflation rates in the United States. We've seen productivity gains that in a sense have been breathtaking, 5.6% in the last 12-month time period, helping to maintain real wage growth, support profits, and minimize pressures on the price level. But employment gains have been minimal. The numbers that came out this morning, January 10th, from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, showed that in essence over the last year, the last 12 months, in the total employment estimates, the change in employment is 3,000 on a base of about 134 million. So one might describe that as flat. If we look at the payroll jobs survey, which is a different survey, employment over the past year is down 181,000. The previous year, the decline was 1.4 million. So we've seen an improvement in the labor market relative to the year before, but it has not been dramatic. It is a soft spot, to use Chairman Greenspan's phrase. The recession that we went through was very, very different from other recessions that many of us in the room can remember. We had booming housing. I'm assuming we probably have some realtors here. Realtors entitled people have been giddy with excitement over the last year. Building permits in Oregon for the first 11 months of 2002 rose by 5%. Consumer spending grew throughout the recession. On average, in the previous 6 recessions, there had been no growth in consumer spending. Not this time. Debt service burdens have actually declined. With the wave of refinancing, to the extent we've had 40% of the outstanding mortgage balances in the United States refinanced over the last 2 years. 0% car loans. Half the refinances were cash outs, again, which helped support consumer spending. Business investment has been extraordinarily weak. We had a decline in business investment of about 12%. Business fixed investment, that's about double the average in the previous 6 recessions. We had 6 down quarters in equipment and software, which of course is extraordinarily important to Oregon and the rest of the Northwest. The upturn has had a number of sort of barriers or hurdles, things that have slowed it down. 3 years of falling net worth. Equities markets peaked in the spring of 2000, and we don't have final data yet for balance sheets for the end of 2002, but I think we've basically had 3 years of declines in net worth with some impact or risks to consumer spending, as well as increasing the cost of capital to business. There are credit market jitters. The spreads between low-risk and high-risk obligations, now they've gone down a little bit in recent weeks, but have generally risen over the course of the last year, reflecting fear fear about loan losses. You've seen venture capitalists pull back, and a tightening in credit standards that has shown up in the Federal Reserve survey of loan officers. Worries about war, additional terrorist attacks, diverting attention. And we've seen a breaking of the faith, if you like, whether we talk about Tyco or Enron or WorldCom or Arthur Andersen. Accepted standards of behavior were not met. We've seen the Sarbanes-Oxley response to that. Again, diverting attention, shaking faith in institutions. And we've got a lot of excess capacity. All that investment that we had in the latter part of the 1990s has resulted in excess capacity in a lot of industries, telecommunications, portions of the technology sector, and that is a barrier to increases in investment. Those are the drags. On the push side, on the upside, we've of course had expansionary monetary policy. Now we've had 12 cuts in the federal funds rate, taking the federal funds rate down to 1.25%. Fiscal policy turned expansionary in 2001. That has continued, and of course this week we've seen a variety of proposals for additional expansionary fiscal policy. We're not sure how that's going to come out, but of course you've seen the proposal for moving ahead the tax cuts that were passed last year, doing something about double taxation of dividends, the child care, expanding the child care credit, the marriage penalty, reducing that, additional state assistance, extended benefits, other proposals for rebates, public works. I think we can be sure that there will be some sort of additional fiscal stimulus that will come out as we move through 2003. The strong productivity gains, I think, are very important, not only in sort of holding down price pressures and supporting real incomes. That's going to be, that strength in productivity is going to be one of the things that rebuilds balance sheets, supports spending, and I think will help the economy grow over time. That, of course, is the key to rising living standards over time. And then the passage of time. Okay. The passage of time in the sense that inventories get reduced, stuff wears out, new stuff comes along. That's part and parcel of the process of expansion, and that process is underway. From an inflation perspective, in the last 12 months, consumer price index rose 2.2%. The core, which excludes food and energy, is up 2%. The index for domestic purchases in the third quarter rose at an annual rate of 1.2%. Think about that. Again, those of you in the room can remember double-digit rates. We're now talking 1.2%. How far away are we from deflation? Okay, it's not very far. Okay, now I don't think it's going to happen. But we're in a world of falling goods prices, clothing prices, car prices, lots of technology products prices going down. Service prices have continued to increase. But a low inflation environment has some of the attributes of a deflationary environment. Okay, do you mind holding cash now? After all, you could put it in a money market fund and get 0.6%. Debt loads. You're not going to get bailed out by inflation carrying debt. It can become serious problems in a low inflation environment. The Fed's made it very clear. I mean, they would take actions to try to make sure that does not happen. But the important thing is inflation in the short run is not a constraint on Federal Reserve policy. I think the most likely course of inflation this last year, it'll probably come in the 1.6, 1.7 range, and I suspect that this year we'll probably be talking about something around 2, not a major problem. From an interest rate perspective, again, 12 cuts by the Federal Reserve. That has helped make possible the refinancing stuff, the car loan deals. I believe that they are done. It gets easier to say as they get closer to zero. But I think you'll see the Federal Reserve by the second half of this year start to slowly take those rate cuts back. I'm assuming that what's going to happen is that the economy is going to continue to grow, that we will get through, if you like, the soft spot, Growth rates moving up into the 2.5% to 3% range for calendar 2003. That the inflation rate will be near 2. In the rates, we will not see major moves, and it'll be a slow process, but I'd look for very short-term rates to start to rise in the second half of the year. I don't think that's going to be a quick process. There are clearly risks out there. You know, the war, terrorism sort of risk, the shock that might deliver, some faltering in consumer spending, which has really held up remarkably well, additional weakness in financial markets, energy hits, not just the Middle Eastern situation, but of course combine that with what's going on in Venezuela. We've seen a spike in world oil prices. That, of course, is like a tax increase in the U.S. economy. The risks the other way, and I think there are some that you could get stronger growth if one were to get a relatively quick resolution of the situation in the Middle East, the potential war with Iraq, resulting in a drop in oil prices, a removal of at least one element of uncertainty. That's got some upside possibilities to it. There are a lot of risks to the outlook, but I think with the basic policies that are in place, with the passage of time, the reductions in inventories, things wearing out, that is setting the stage for a continuation of the upturn. But it's going to be different without the rebound in housing. We don't have deferred auto sales. Those things aren't going to be present. What we're waiting for is that rebound in business capital formation. Just one sort of comment on Measure 28, and I wasn't sure how to respond to the question. We are in Oregon are a one-trick pony. Okay, that's what we are. Okay, a one-trick pony with no reserves. Okay, and this is the first time that the Oregon tax system, as it was changed in 1990, has been tested by a down cycle. Okay, and I think what comes with that is great risk. As was pointed out, sort of what we do, we educate, medicate, and incarcerate. Okay, and basically, if you have to have significant cuts, that's where it's got to come. And the risk is what that would do to longer-term Oregon performance. Now, I would close with my sort of current version of my poem. Worries were mounting as the leaves began to fall. The threats seemed to grow that the upturn would stall. The third quarter came in with a growth rate of 4. More investment and consumers whose spending did soar. Retail sales, job counts, and the market did drop. Would this year-long upturn come to a stop? War worries are growing and threats to remain as the nation tries to deal with Pyongyang and Hussein. Equity prices gave us 3 years of decline. The bubble has burst and there was blame to assign. There were Enron and WorldCom and those darn analysts too, not to mention our enthusiasm about the things tech would do. Basic trust was torn asunder and must be restored. Governance is a topic that once made us bored. Consumers have kept spending on homes and new wheels at rates we all knew were lifetime deals. Amidst the tech wreck, a poor Christmas and the bear market's length, the forces for expansion unsteadily built their strength. New stuff, less inventory, and things wearing out, and monetary and fiscal policy still with some clout. Cash flows are rising and utilization will too. This year, capital formation will come slowly through. Employment trends up at a pace that is slow, far different than we saw only 2 years ago. The bubble was fun in the years that it lasted. I suppose it was somewhat like getting blasted. It's hangover time and our growth it constrains, but in time this will pass in a new refrain. New risks have emerged and we're still somewhat tense. More resources are being shifted into defense. The shocks since 2000 have made confidence fall, but the resilience of our system we should all recall. Oregon's long boom faded quite fast. Its performance for a while was dead last. The mix was the wrong one for this downtrend. Over time, the economy will slowly mend. Income tax reliance with no rainy day reserves hath not the stability that spending deserves. The shortest school years, slower courts, and empty jails are proposals to deal with financial travails. Liabilities have leaped for public unfunded pensions, revealing things some leaders have been afraid to mention. A new governor, a new legislature, and a promise to restore mean an exciting year as we move towards '04. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, pleasure once again to be here in front of the City Club. I still have my job, which is interesting, so given our forecasting capabilities of late. But what I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about the Oregon economy, where we're at, why we've seen such a fall in our state revenues, and also a brief outlook of what we see for the near future. Also, I'll spend a little bit more time on some comments about Measure 28 and their effect on the economy. First, as John was covering for you, the U.S. economy is, in a sense, in the midst of a jobless recovery, and so is the Oregon economy. On top of the recession, we find the largest drops in state revenues since the early 1980s. So how did we find ourselves now in this dire position? If we look back as to how this recession started, the stock market was growing over 20% per year. Business investment was the highest percentage of gross domestic product since World War II. U.S. and Oregon economies were steaming full ahead. There is one government office, though, that worries about parties getting out of hand. So the Federal Reserve hiked up interest rates through mid-2000. Firms were just finishing up a capital buying binge that included avoidance from the Y2K disaster. And the stock market was peaking. This was a time that dot-coms failed to follow the advice of one of my graduate school advisors. You can only be a promising young man for so long. And of course, capital venturists replied, no profits, no funding. With businesses ready to back off investments anyways, and the Federal Reserve giving them an added reason to do so, our high-flying economy headed towards the toilet. This recession, business investment collapse, stock market correction, the manufacturing sector is depressed, is exactly the type of recession that is especially harmful to the Oregon economy. We made a concerted effort to diversify our manufacturing base back as we turned the corner into the 1980s. That was achieved through the growth of high tech, but in the process, we became a more manufacturing-based economy. Oregon excels in making the products that businesses buy, the chips, machines, equipment that helps businesses produce the final goods and services that consumers buy. And this is the very sector of the economy that slipped away during this recession. Employment is down around 0.7%, we've calculated, for the year 2001. For this year, when all the numbers are in, it may end up being about 0.9% down for 2002. Back in the early 80s, job losses were 2.5% in 1981 and 5.7% in 1982. Definitely the recession was more severe in the 1980s. But tax revenues have dropped this time by about the same relative amount as they did in the early 1980s. So why? We know this recession hit Oregon harder than other states. We have the highest unemployment rate in the country, holding that distinction for 15 of the last 17 months. But it was the rapid slowdown in manufacturing coupled with the stock market correction that really devastated tax revenues. If we think back just a few years, to the second half of 1990s up to the year 2000. Do you remember double-digit growth in the stock market? Decent wage increases with bonuses? How about signing bonuses? Stock options? All these things are taxable. Capital gains were only about 1% of personal income in Oregon in 1980. It was slightly over 10% in 2000. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're an electrical engineer at Intel. You have your base salary, nice yearly wage increases. You also had bonuses, stock options, and your own stock portfolio. All these additional income sources above your base salary have gone away, even the wage raises. You are still employed so that you're not an unemployment statistic, but your taxable income base has definitely declined. The top 10% of filers in Oregon with total income of $90,000 and up pay 50% of personal income taxes in the year 2000. They also earned 82% of all capital gains. and they are also taxed at the highest marginal rate. On top of this, now you have a recession and the old connections of lost jobs, lost wages, and then lost tax revenues because of that. Combine this with corporate tax revenue down almost 50%, very low interest rates. The state does earn income on its accounts. Well, it all adds up. And make no mistake about it, the connection is the economy. This recession is not like the 1980-82 recession. All groups suffer in any recession, but the higher income groups most likely had a higher proportion of their incomes lost than what was true in the old-fashioned, hit mainly wages and salaries type of recession. The rich are no longer fabulously rich, they're just plain old rich. And this group pays a ton of taxes, or they used to. This recession has definitely disrupted the transference of wealth into income. Thus, we have tax revenues down because we have the recession, but we also have the added impact of this disturbance of this transference of wealth into income. And thus, we have a very sharp reversal, almost overnight, of the strong economy and the strong stock market and those string of kicker checks. Will we recover? John Mitchell notes one common factor that all recessions have. They all come to an end. And it doesn't seem that this will be any different. It appears the end is near, but this recovery is behaving like a hangover from an all-night party. There are hopeful signs, though, in the haze. Exports in Oregon are up over 9% through the third quarter of 2002 compared with the same period of a year ago. We're also seeing that year-over-year job losses continue to decline, and we're seeing in the most recent months a little uptick in terms of employment. Housing market still appears to be strong, and we're also having a stabilization of unemployment insurance claims. And with the outlook that John gave for the national economy, we believe that this jobless recovery will soon turn into a job-creating recovery. So our outlook for Oregon economy is slow growth through most of 2003 with growth strengths as we enter 2004. We will not reach year 2000 pre-recession levels of employment until 2004. We also forecast general fund revenues for the upcoming biennium to be 7.5% up, but that's up from the 99-01 biennium period. So although in recent months we've seen these modest pickup of employment, we believe that the recovery is in place, though it's been sort of a jobless recovery at the moment. There's also many risks lying ahead. John has enumerated many of those that are in the national economy, and those are the same ones that would affect us here also in Oregon. A few that are somewhat unique to us, we have to worry about energy costs coming from our main utilities, PGE, Northwest Natural. We've seen a little bit of a rollback in those costs, which are very positive signs, but also we have news from Bonneville Power Administration that they may have to cover their debts and also increase their rates. So it's kind of an uncertain situation on the energy costs. John mentioned about corporate reporting. There's guilt by association. If a high-techs feel that they have not been reporting profits correctly, that also could affect our high-tech firms and the ability then to get more funds for capital investments through the stock market. In my mind, if taking away Martha Stewart and Shane's helps, so be it. We also have state and local government is going to be a drag on the economy. State and local governments are latecomers to recession. That's because our tax collections come late. The tax collections that came in 2002 were based on the year 2001. So when those final payments come in, this is where we really start to see the information of the economy sort of tanking more than we expected, especially on the revenue side. So that's going to also be a drag on the economy. Basically, I would say good riddance to 2002. At least it wasn't as bad as it could have been. 2003 will be slow but steady, gaining strength as we end. Only, of course, if we dodge the bullets, both figuratively and literally. Now, what I'd like to do is make a couple comments on Measure 28. We were asked to comment on Measure 28, specifically what does this mean for the economy? And I want to say that my comments that are coming up, in no way am I an advocate for a yes or no vote on Measure 28. Also, I'm not here as an official position of either the governor or of any state legislator. Does that cover it? Actual tax revenues for fiscal year 2002 are down $910 million. We started this biennium with a forecast of $11.5 billion. Our latest forecast is $9.6 billion, a shortfall of $1.9 billion, or about a 17% drop in projected revenues. Appropriations out of the general fund have been reduced either by direct spending cuts or by moving expenditures to be covered by other funding by about $1.7 billion. The legislatively approved budget left an ending balance when we started this whole thing of $96.4 million, or about 0.8% of projected revenues as a cushion. If you use this all up, use up the ending balance too, the final shortfall is $112 million, which is being dealt now through program spending cuts. Included in this whole scenario of numbers is $310 million in program reductions that are on the books, but have not yet been implemented. If Measure 28 is not passed at the polls, there will be $310 million in across-the-board general fund cuts. How will this impact the economy? First, what I'd like to do is address some half-truths about the relation of government and the economy. These are not clear-cut fallacies. They contain an element of truth, but they have certain appeal in their arguments related to Measure 28. Half-truth number one, there will be no impact on the economy by a cut in state government spending. It's simply a wash. The private sector pays less taxes, and the government spends less. I really don't understand this one. The logic seems okay, but I can't think about it operationally. Let's say, for example, you have a dry cleaner establishment in Umatilla. The proprietor has two cash registers. One cash register holds payments from customers who have jobs in the private sector. The other cash register holds payments from customers who work in the public sector. The owner does this because he believes in half-truth number one. The money in the public sector cash register is not real, and to mix it up with money from the other cash register would be double counting. If a prison guard loses his job and doesn't go to the dry cleaner, there really isn't any loss of business because there really wasn't any true money to begin with. Likewise, if you cut the number of school days, you increase the number of daycare days. How is this a wash? We have a mixed economy, public, private, and public. If either is decreased, so is economic activity. This is short-run outcome, and the debate, if there is to be one, must center on the long-run outcome beyond the present business cycle. Half-truth number two, governments are to cut spending and waste during recessions, not raise taxes. This is really an extension of the view that government should run like a business. You know, during a recession, sales revenues decline to businesses, they cut their costs, lay off workers, and by this logic, government should be doing the same thing. Well, at the federal level, President Bush and the Republican-controlled Congress believe that increased spending and reduced taxes is the way to stimulate the economy. When a government has the ability to deficit spend, this is the proper action to combat a recession. Debate can center on the amount of stimulus provided by the specific plans, but the end result is priming the pump of the U.S. economy. State and local governments, though, find themselves in a different situation. Generally, by their constitution, deficit spending is not an option. When tax revenues fall, state and local governments must either raise more taxes or cut spending in order to balance their budgets. Either move is not stimulative to the economy. So half-truth number two is simply stating a fact about state governments balancing their budgets. If the goal is to stimulate the economy, then a government should increase spending and or reduce taxes. The federal government can pursue these type of these short-run, these short-term stimulative policies in terms of recessions, in times of recessions. State governments don't have this choice. They must follow policies which counter to help government in the short run. Half-truth number two is right to say that raising taxes will not be stimulative to an economy. And it is right that governments must balance their budgets. But it does not necessarily follow that it must balance its budget only through spending cuts, and this will be a short-term help to the economy since taxes are not being raised. Half-truth number three, businesses will not locate in a state that raises taxes every time there is a budget shortfall. In my mind, this half-truth is really trying to say that businesses do not want to be in a state with an irresponsible government. What do businesses look for? Yes, everything else held constant, lower taxes. They also look for good private and public infrastructure, streets, highways, airports, waterports, energy, and the like. Businesses desire a hardworking, educated workforce and the ability to attract qualified workers. A key element is a quality education system, K through 12, community colleges and universities. A business does not want to pay taxes for a poor education system. It will pay taxes for a good education system. The government's job is to get the most quality out of the tax dollars. During a crisis period, a responsible government protects its education system, even if this means an unpopular choice. Many economists see economic downturns in Darwinian terms. To paraphrase Warren Buffett, all swimmers do fine at high tide. When the tide goes out, you see who is naked. Right? The inefficient go under, freeing up resources that can be used by the survivors, those that are the most efficient businesses that survive the downturn. In the same vein, the government is forced to be more efficient, reduce unnecessary administrative overhead, eliminate waste, prioritize programs, and thus be in a position to provide more services per tax dollar. I don't interpret this to mean that any raising of taxes will stop this process. The question here is survival of the fittest, and the people of the state need to evaluate what is important and use whatever means in order to preserve that which they value. They have a right to demand accountability so that the services they want continue to be of the highest quality for the money spent. During this economic downturn and start of recovery, if Measure 28 passes, in my opinion, the impact on the economy is no worse than if Measure 28 fails. The longer-term impact is more uncertain, and I'd rather be in a state with responsible citizens and a responsible government. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. I asked John prior to him coming up, are you going to make some predictions? And he gave a typical economist kind of response. He said, sure, it's free. This is the larger context for a question that our governor-elect is making the rounds, apparently, even before inauguration, to large companies that are either headquartered outside of Oregon or have significant influence on our economy. Two-part question. What do you think he is saying to these companies, given our current status? And second, because it is also free, what kind of advice would you give him to say to the companies he has yet to visit?
If you look at that, I think it's a very positive thing to do, to sort of reaffirming the notion to the extent that Oregon has a reputation, sort of not open for business kind of thing. I mean, there's a new team in town. Hey, we want to work with you to try to get increments in employment in Oregon. I think it's a positive step to the extent that they don't know the governor. And maybe to say, really echoing what Tom said, that we're going to try to put things in place that are going to not do us harm over time. To pass Measure 28, try to do that. Try to maintain the infrastructure, the education system, to show a commitment to that. I think it's very positive. But I should point out, I cover 6 states for the bank: Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, Utah, and California. Don't think we're alone. Governor Davis we're going to try to get California energized. Governor Kempthorne in Idaho, Governor Locke in Washington. Everybody's trying. All of a sudden, economic development is back on the front burner, pretty much no matter where you are. So it's a very competitive environment.
Betsy Warrener, City Club member. My question is about the last half-truth, and I just wanted to read from this report. An argument advanced against Measure 28 is that plugging part of the budget deficit with a tax increase reduces the incentive to further eliminate inefficiencies in state government and school districts. And working at a community college, I'm noticing that we are not cutting fat, we're cutting muscle and bone, that the community college where I work has very few inefficiencies. and those that do exist are probably not that much different from what exists in the private sector. So what I'm concerned about is the public perception of inefficiencies where those don't necessarily exist.
Yes, you want to keep in mind, raising taxes just for the purpose of raising taxes is discouraging to businesses. But here what we're looking at is what is the reason for raising the taxes? What are we trying to hold on to by doing this? And I think that's a much different perspective that businesses would look at rather than a scenario where we're raising taxes just to raise revenues. In terms of, I think you're absolutely right. There is a public perception and it's in many reports, public school districts having one of the highest administrative costs per pupil, shortest school days. These are things that have got to change. People are not going to be voting for a measure. They're not going to be voting for taxes unless there is a corresponding accountability to it. Whether real or perceived, that has to be there. And without it, we're not going to get anywhere.
Can I make one comment? You know, I don't think, now I think everybody in this room understands it, but I worry that there is not the understanding of how the Oregon system has changed. This is not 1981, 82 again. It is a fundamentally different system, and the load, the demands from the educational perspective are not what they were in any other recession that Oregon has ever had. It is a different system.
Carol Witherell, City Club member. A long-term forecast. What do you think will happen to Oregon's economy if Measure 28 fails, both in terms of the long-term costs of reduced education, health, and law enforcement services, and the prospects of businesses remaining in or relocating to Oregon? Thank you.
That's the great uncertainty. We don't know really to what extent, if, say, Measure 28 does not pass, the continued cuts, K through 12, I think it was mentioned here, like 95 million as example, 90 million to, I think, some of the social services. To what extent that will mean a further deterioration of those infrastructures, that is unknown. If truly we are at a point where we've got all the fat out and all the waste is out, and this really does cut to the bone and through the muscle, then it doesn't bode well, because our future tax revenue forecasts are not showing a huge jump back to the type of growth we had before. That type of bubble is gone. We've made a shift downwards, and we're going to be short from bienniums out now from what we were looking at. Relative to, as John said, we had a wonderful system that was there that allowed us to do all these things. Transfer education, K through 12 over to the state, the prison increases, all those things, the healthcare costs, all those things were able to be done because of this bubble that was occurring. Now that bubble's burst, and we're probably not going to go back to it anytime soon. So it's a great uncertainty. I worry about it a lot.
One would hope that we don't have to destroy the system to get enough interest and motivation to fix it. I think that's the bottom line.
Hello, Tom and John. I see you all the time at various conferences. It's kind of interesting asking you a question. Bill Parrish, City Club member. By the way, I think we're both blessed to have you in the state. Tom, you've done a terrific job. I do a lot of economic studies. We're really lucky to have you as our state economist. But what I want to ask you is related to PERS, a specific question related to PERS. As you know, I manage portfolios of investments, and I would benefit greatly if PERS were privatized. But I think it's wrong. I think there's some really big movements underway in this state with respect to PERS that no one's talking about. Of course, it would be the greatest gold mine in the history of the investment industry if all those accounts were suddenly privatized. So my question is this: why isn't anyone really looking out for the participants and the taxpayers with respect to this? It seems like all the lobbyists have lined up all these big investment companies, and there's a huge movement afoot to privatize it. And if you believe that teachers and healthcare workers are entitled to a decent pension, why don't we fix the system? I guess my question is, what do you see going on with PERS, the inside?
Who's talking
you, Woody. Was I think so. No, I was talking to you.
I'm not the state economist.
Well, you know, the governor has stated that the legislators will not go home until there is some sort of fix for PERS. That either means that we'll have sessions through 2015, or we're going to find some very creative ways to redefine what fixed means. And I think this is where we're concerned about is how do you fix a system which is projecting to, you know, have a shortfall 10 years out of $15 billion? Protect the interests of those that were under the system, but also not put undue extra burden on the tax-paying system. I don't know a solution to that. I wish I did, but you know, I'm basically going to tell you that I'm going to be kind of silent on the topic.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what, I certainly do not know what the answer to that is. I mean, it looks like it was a small series of incremental decisions over a long period of time that culminated in a massive problem that is going to have to be addressed. But I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. And I haven't been party to the studies.
My name is Greg Raisman, and I'm a City Club member. And I'm curious, in the president's stimulus package, it seems he has a relatively modest $75 billion that's going to help states that are struggling. And I'm just curious what your perspective is on how this might impact Oregon.
Well, you know, the president put the plan out there. The Democrats put a plan out there. I don't know what the ultimate outcome, obviously, is going to be. I suspect that we might end up with more assistance for the states than is perhaps in the president's plan. There's some there. There's more in the Democratic plan. I suspect we're going to end up with some. With some of that, whether it's helping with the Homeland Security stuff, Medicaid stuff, to try to minimize or support to some the state government so they won't have to make the full range of cuts or tax increases. But I don't, you know, I mean, Oregon will certainly be will be one of the beneficiaries of that, but I have no idea how big that's going to be.
We'll have time for one more question.
Pat Rumor, City Club member. John, you mentioned that one of the unknowns in the national economy is an impending or projected war with Iraq. And Tom, then you did an analysis looking at how this recession has uniquely impacted Oregon. I'm wondering if the two of you could talk about the impact of a war in Iraq on the Oregon economy, who benefits and who loses.
Hopefully the Iraqis. Well, yeah, if we look at if we go at sort of a short war scenario, let's go back to the 1990-91 scenario. You think through, okay, you got the spike in oil prices, you have sort of the CNN effect, so we're glued to the television set for a while. It's over very quickly, then what happens? Oil prices decline, that sort of uncertainty is lifted, and the economy grows potentially more rapidly. That's an upside risk. It would be short-term negative, longer term getting it resolved would be positive. There's a wide range of scenarios you could paint. The long war scenario, the sustained increase in energy prices for a long period of time, response attacks within the United States. Clearly, then we've got a negative scenario.
I just concur with John. The same idea. The feeling right now is that the uncertainty may be worse than what actually may happen. We've seen the price of oil, a barrel of oil is up in the low $30 right now. Very quick scenario, if it's over very quickly, Iraq has the second highest oil reserves in the world. We could see oil prices go down to the low teens very quickly, which would be beneficial. Long drawn out war, all bets are off as to what may happen, and my guess it would be inflationary a little bit in our economy, and also probably derail the recovery. Oregon specifically, we don't have any Air Force bases, Navy bases, Army bases, so a lot of not very many defense contract type firms. A few like FLIR gets a couple of contracts. Oregon Steel has gotten a couple, but we're not a real beneficiary directly from defense contracts in the state. Indirectly, though, most of these war things use computer chips, and so indirectly that is a help to us. But mainly, I just agree with John, which is always a safe thing to do.
I think we're going to end on a real positive note, especially with this terrific support from the City Club for ballot measure 28. I think I have a lot of confidence in the Oregon voters and their wisdom. It's a beautiful week. It's 10 days into the new year, and the days are getting longer. So I thank our wonderful speakers and all you City Club members. The City Club is adjourned.